The bishop came to our house on a Thursday evening, and I knew before he sat down that this was not a visit about anything ordinary. Children are rarely sent away from ordinary conversations. Mine were sent to my mother-in-law's within the hour, and that alone told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. My name is Hannah. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I left when I was 27, carrying very little except the certainty that I could not spend the rest of my life the way I had already spent 7 years of it. This channel is where I say the things my community would never allow me to say out loud. Today I want to tell you what happened the night the bishop sat at my kitchen table, because I think there are women watching this who have sat across from someone just like him, in a kitchen just like mine, and never had the words for what was actually happening to them. I need to explain something first, because people outside our world often misunderstand how authority worked in our community. The bishop was not simply a preacher. He was the final interpreter of the Ordnung, the unwritten code that governed everything from the width of a hem to the shape of a marriage. When a husband could not resolve something with his wife, when a wife's behavior had become, in the community's eyes, a concern, the bishop was the one who arrived to restore order. Not with anger, never with anger. That was the part that took me years to understand. The most dangerous thing about the system I grew up in was how gentle it always sounded. I had said no to my husband 3 times over the course of about 2 months. I want to be precise about what I mean, because I know how that sounds to people who have never lived inside a world like mine. I do not mean I refused him cruelly, or with contempt, or to punish him. I mean that on 3 separate nights, exhausted past the point where my body could give anything more, I said the word no, softly, apologetically, the way Amish women are taught to deliver anything difficult. And in our community, that was enough. That was more than enough. By the 3rd refusal, my husband had already spoken to his mother. His mother had already spoken to the bishop's wife. And the bishop's wife had already come to my kitchen once before. The visit I described in an earlier story, where she told me that a wife's first work is her husband's peace. That visit was supposed to be enough to correct me. When it wasn't, when nothing changed inside me the way they expected it to, the bishop himself came. He sat across from me at my own table. My husband sat beside him. I sat alone on the other side, hands folded in my lap, the way I had been taught since childhood, though inside I felt something close to a storm building behind my ribs. There is a particular kind of fear that comes from knowing a decision about your life has already been made without you. I think many women recognize that feeling even outside a community like mine, in a marriage, in a workplace, in a family. You walk into a room believing you still have a voice, and slowly you realize you are only being informed of a verdict. The bishop spoke slowly, carefully, his voice calm and measured, the way people often speak when they are delivering something painful while convincing themselves they are being kind. He began by telling me there had been concerns. He said a wife's heart belongs first to God and then to her husband. He said emotional energy and physical devotion were limited resources, and that when a woman withheld herself, she was not simply making a private choice. She was disrupting the order God had established for the household. Then he said something I have never been able to fully forget, no matter how many years have passed. He said that a wife who refuses her husband is opening a door, and that door does not stay empty for long. He did not need to finish the sentence. Everyone in that room understood what he meant. He was telling me, gently, patiently, that my exhaustion, my sore back, my sleepless nights with a sick child were an invitation to something dark, that my no was not a boundary. It was a vulnerability in the wall of our marriage that something evil could walk through. I sat there and listened, nodding at the appropriate moments, doing exactly what I had been raised my entire life to do. But somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I noticed something for the first time, something that would not leave me alone in the months that followed. Nobody in that room asked me a single question. Not one. Nobody asked how tired I was. Nobody asked what the last few months of my life had looked like. The sick children, the endless work, the body that simply had nothing left some nights. Nobody asked what I believed, or why I had reached the place where I said no. The conclusion had already been reached before the bishop ever sat down. I was the one who needed correcting. Everyone else in the room was simply there to deliver the correction with as much gentleness as possible. That gentleness is the part I want you to understand, because I think it is the part most people miss when they imagine communities like mine. There was no shouting, no one raised a hand, no one threatened me directly. The bishop's voice never changed. He quoted scripture. He spoke about burdens, about the weight my husband carried in trying to lead our family well, about how a faithful wife makes that burden lighter instead of heavier. Every sentence was wrapped in concern. Every word sounded like care. And that is precisely what made it so powerful, and so difficult to resist. If someone yells at you, you can identify the harm. If someone strikes you, everyone around you can see it. But what do you call it when the harm arrives disguised entirely as love? He told me, before he left that evening, that he expected things to improve. He did not say what would happen if they didn't. He didn't need to. I had grown up watching what happened to women whose names started to be mentioned differently at church gatherings, whose husbands began sitting a little further from the other men after service, whose mothers started visiting a little less. I knew the shape of the consequence even without him naming it. That is how the system survived. It did not need explicit threats, because every woman in that room already carried the threat inside her, learned from childhood, reinforced every time she watched it happen to someone else. After the bishop left, the house felt smaller than it had that morning. I remember standing at the window, watching his buggy disappear down the lane, and for the first time in my life, I felt something that frightened me more than the conversation itself. I felt alone inside my own community, not outside it, inside it, surrounded by people who loved me, in a house full of my own children's toys and my own handmade quilts, and still completely alone. Because the one thing nobody in that room had considered was what I actually needed. I stayed in that marriage for 3 more years after that visit. I want to be honest about that, because I know some people watching this expect a story where a woman hears something like this and leaves immediately. That is not how it works for most of us. Leaving is not a door you walk through the moment you understand something is wrong. It is a door you spend years finding the courage to even look for, while still doing the laundry, still making the meals, still nodding at the right moments in every conversation that tells you your no is a danger to your household, rather than a simple, human, exhausted truth. When I finally left, years later, I sat across from a therapist for the first time in my life and described that evening at my kitchen table. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I have thought about nearly every week since. She said that what the bishop did that night had a name outside the world I came from. It was called coercive control, dressed in the language of faith. She told me that framing a woman's exhaustion as a spiritual failure and her boundary as a danger to the household was one of the oldest tools used to keep women compliant, across cultures, across religions, across centuries. My community did not invent it. It had simply given it its own vocabulary, its own scripture, its own gentle bishop sitting calmly at a kitchen table. I do not tell this story because I believe every bishop is cruel, or every Amish marriage is built this way. That would not be honest, and honesty is the entire reason I make these videos. I know families in my old community who love each other well, who built genuine partnerships inside the same system I am describing. But I also know that the system gives enormous, almost unchecked power to anyone determined to use it, and it gives almost no language, no protection, and no permission to the woman sitting across the table with her hands folded in her lap. If you have ever been told that your tiredness was a spiritual failure, that your no was a danger rather than a truth, that your exhaustion was somehow an invitation for harm to enter your life, I want you to hear something nobody said to me that night. Your body is not a door that needs guarding by someone else's permission. Your exhaustion is not evidence of anything except that you are human, and humans need rest. And a boundary spoken gently is still a boundary, no matter how many people in the room decide it is a problem instead of a truth. This is my story. If it stayed with you, tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap.